The noise is a living thing. It swells and crests like the tide against the rocks. Just beyond my window, a wave of laughter and chatter and the clinking of glasses. My house, usually so quiet you can hear the dust settling, is full to the bursting. 80 years. That's what they're all here for, to celebrate 80 years of my life. My daughter Maria orchestrated it all. She stands near the buffet, her smile a little too tight, her eyes darting towards me every few seconds. She thinks I'm not noticing. But at my age, you notice everything, especially the things people try to hide. I sit at the head of the long dining table, a matriarch on her throne of worn oak. Friends from the church, old neighbors, my grandchildren, they all drift by patting my shoulder, telling me I don't look a day over 60. I smile. I nod. I say, thank you. But my words are hollow echoes in a cavern I've just discovered inside myself. My gaze is fixed on the other end of the table, on the one empty chair. It's not just an empty space. It's a void. A perfectly set place waiting. The polished silverware gleams under the chandelier. The water glass is full condensation beating on its side. The crisp white napkin is folded into a perfect fan, just the way he always liked it. His chair. Leo's chair. Every laugh in the room seems to stop right at its edge, afraid to cross into that silent territory. Every cheerful toast rings false against its stark emptiness. Maria tried to clear the setting an hour ago. Mom, maybe we should... She'd started, her voice gentle. I gave her a look, just one, and she stopped. The chair stayed. A cold certainty is creeping up my spine. A chill that has nothing to do with the autumn air outside. This isn't a missed flight. It's not a last-minute work emergency. The silence from him, the deafening, deliberate silence for days, it's been leading to this. This empty chair isn't an accident. It's a statement. It's a final word in a conversation I didn't even know we were having. And as I sit here surrounded by everyone who loves me, I have never felt more alone. The chair is mocking me. It's telling me that the greatest sacrifice of my life has just been returned to sender. That wasn't the beginning. The beginning was 5 days earlier when the house was still quiet and my hope was still a sturdy, reliable thing. 5 days earlier, the scent of lemon polish and old wood filled the air, a fragrance so familiar it was like a part of my own breathing. I ran a soft cloth over the surface of the mahogany sideboard, my reflection wavering back at me, a woman with a roadmap of a face, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and hands that told the story of a life's work. My knuckles are swollen with arthritis, the skin thin as paper, but they are strong. They had to be. My 80 years were stacked like firewood inside me, ready to be lit by the warmth of the coming celebration. The party was Maria's idea, of course. My eldest is practical, dependable. She lives just 10 minutes away and treats me like a fragile piece of china, which I both appreciate and resent. But the party, this big party, wasn't for her. It wasn't even for me, not really. It was for Leo. It was a stage perfectly set for his return. My boy, my brilliant, beautiful boy. I moved through the downstairs rooms, my duster flicking over surfaces, but my mind was elsewhere. It was in the past, counting the cost of things. I looked at the floorboards in the hallway, still scuffed and worn after all these years. I remembered the year Leo turned 16. I'd had the money saved to have them sanded and refinished. But then he'd seen a flyer for a summer program, a prestigious art course in Boston. He had a gift, his teachers said, a rare talent. The floorboards could wait. His future couldn't. The floors were never refinished. He got into the program. My hand paused over a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. Leo, age 22, graduating from college with a degree in architecture. He's beaming his arm around me. I'm beaming too, but my smile hides the exhaustion of 1,000 double shifts at the fish processing plant. The smell of brine and cold had clung to my coat for years, a scent I scrubbed from my skin but could never erase from my memory. It was the smell of his tuition, the smell of his success. My husband, Frank, God rest his soul, had worked at the docks. He'd come home with hands raw and bleeding, but he'd look at the sketches Leo was always making, and he'd nod. The boy's got something, Ev. Let him fly. Frank understood. He understood the cost and thought it was worth it. He'd been gone for 15 years now, and sometimes the weight of remembering for both of us was heavy. I finished my dusting and stood in the center of the living room, my hands on my hips. Everything was perfect, spotless, ready. The phone rang its shrill sound, cutting through the quiet. I knew it would be Maria. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, Maria. Just finishing up the cleaning. You shouldn't be doing all that yourself. I told you David and I could come over, and I told you I have it under control." I said, a familiar edge in my voice. "I like doing it. It helps me think." There was a pause on the other end. The Maria pause. The one where she's deciding whether to push an issue or let it go. Did you hear from Leo?" she asked, her voice carefully casual. My heart gave a little squeeze, a mix of defensiveness and anticipation. "He's busy, Maria. You know how important his work is. He's probably on a plane right now trying to get everything done so he can be here. He'll call." "Of course," she said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice faint as a sigh. "It's just... California is a long way. I hope he gave himself enough time. Leo is not a child. He knows how to manage his time." I snapped more harshly than I intended. "He's flying in for his mother's 80th birthday. He will be here." My own words were a shield. The more I said them, the more real they felt. "Okay, Mom. Okay, I'll call you tomorrow." "You do that," I said, and hung up feeling a prickle of irritation. Why did she always have to do that? Plant her little seeds of worry. She loved her brother, I knew that. But there was always a part of her that seemed to be waiting for him to fail to disappoint. Maybe it was because he'd gotten to leave to build a big, shiny life on the other side of the country, while she'd stayed here in this small town, living a small, predictable life. I didn't mean to be cruel, but the thought was always there. I had 2 children, but only one of them had truly fulfilled the dreams I'd held for them. I went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea, the ritual calming my nerves. As the kettle began to whistle, the doorbell chimed. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to a young delivery man holding an extravagant bouquet of flowers. Stargazer lilies, white roses, and deep purple irises, all wrapped in crackling cellophane. They were breathtaking. "Evelyn Reed?" the young man asked. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He handed them over. "Have a great day." I carried them inside, their weight surprising me, their fragrance filling the hallway. I set them on the dining room table, my hands trembling slightly as I searched for a card. There was only a small blank envelope tucked into the greenery. I opened it. Empty. But it didn't need a name. I knew. Who else would send such a magnificent, dramatic display? This was so like him, sending the flowers ahead, a grand, silent announcement of his arrival. My Leo, always thinking, always one step ahead. A smile spread across my face, genuine and deep. I felt foolish for my earlier flicker of doubt. Of course he was coming. He was already here, in a way. I looked at the bouquet, a riot of color and life in my quiet house. It was a promise. The party would be perfect. He would be the guest of honor even more than me. And all my sacrifices, all those years of hard work and doing without, would be sitting right there at the table with us, validated and shining. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet scent of lilies, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Everything was right on track. Everything was exactly as it should be. The next day, Maria arrived with her husband David in tow. The lilies and roses were the first thing they saw sitting in the center of the dining table like a shrine. "My goodness, Mom, those are stunning," Maria said, touching a petal gently. David murmured his agreement, a quiet and steady man who had long ago learned that the best way to navigate our family was with quiet and steady support. "Aren't they something?" I said, beaming. "Leo sent them. Arrived yesterday. I didn't mention the lack of a card. It was an unnecessary detail. The gesture spoke for itself. Maria's smile flickered for a fraction of a second. That was thoughtful of him. We spent the morning in a flurry of gentle activity. David helped me move some of the heavier living room furniture to make more space. Maria went over the guest list with me for the 10th time. "Are you sure you want to invite Mrs. Gable from down the street?" Maria asked, tapping the name with her pen. "You know how she corners people to talk about her ailments." "It's my 80th birthday, Maria, not my funeral. I think I can handle a little talk about bunions," I retorted. Besides, her son was in Leo's class. She'll want to hear all about his success. Every conversation, it seemed, was a path that led back to Leo. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting his light. I knew it wasn't fair to Maria, but I couldn't help it. Maria was my rock, solid and dependable. But Leo was my star. You can lean on a rock, but you wish on a star. Later, while Maria was in the kitchen preparing a tray of sandwiches for lunch, I found myself standing in the hallway, my hand hovering over the telephone. The confidence the flowers had given me was a warm blanket. He was thinking of me. This was the perfect time to call to catch him before he left for the airport. I picked up the receiver and dialed the familiar California number from memory. It rang once, twice, a third time. My confidence began to fray at the edges. On the 4th ring, it clicked over to his voicemail. The recorded voice was smooth, professional, not the warm and laughing voice of my son. "You've reached the office of Leo Reed. I'm unable to take your call right now." My heart sank. The office. He wouldn't be at the office, not now. Not when he should be packing. I waited for the beep, my throat suddenly tight. "Leo, darling, it's your mother," I began, trying to keep my voice light and cheerful. The forced brightness sounded strange in my own ears. "I just received the flowers. They are absolutely beautiful, the most beautiful I've ever seen. Thank you, my love. I was just calling to see where you are. I assume you're on your way to the airport soon. Just wanted to hear your voice before you got on the plane. Everyone is so excited to see you. The whole house is buzzing. Anyway, call me when you can. Be safe. I love you." I hung up the phone, and the silence in the hallway felt heavier than before. The message sounded needy, pleading. I hated that. I was not a needy woman. I was a giver, not a taker. My love was a fortress for my children, not a cage. I straightened my shoulders and walked back toward the kitchen, pushing the unease away. But the unease followed me. It sat with me at lunch and clung to me for the rest of the afternoon. It was in that moment of doubt that my mind drifted back, as it so often did, to the tangible proof of my love. The memory was as clear as if it were yesterday. Leo was 24, living in a tiny rundown apartment in Los Angeles, trying to get his architecture firm off the ground. He had the talent, but he didn't have the capital. He called one night, his voice thin with frustration. A partner he was counting on had pulled out. A big project had fallen through. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom," he'd confessed. "Maybe I should just come home." "Nonsense," I'd said, my own heart hammering with fear. "You will do no such thing. You are not a quitter." The next day, I went to the bank and opened my safe deposit box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was my mother's brooch. A heavy silver Celtic cross, intricate with knots that had no beginning and no end. It was the only thing of real value she had managed to bring with her from Ireland, the only thing of her I had left. When she gave it to me, she'd said, "This is your history, Evelyn. Don't ever let it go." I took it to a jeweler in the city, a man with sad eyes and a magnifying glass permanently attached to his head. He turned it over and over in his palm. He told me it was a fine piece, turn of the century. He offered me a sum that was both shockingly large and insultingly small. It was enough. I didn't tell Leo where the money came from. I just wired it to his account. "A late inheritance from your grandfather," I'd lied. "He always wanted you to have a good start." He flew home a month later to thank me. He looked better, healthier. He took me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. "Mom, I don't know what to say," he'd said, his eyes shining with tears. "You saved me. Your grandfather saved you," I corrected him gently. He knew I was lying. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I saw your coat the other day," he said softly. The old wool one you always used to wear the brooch on the lapel. It's not there anymore. I couldn't meet his eyes. I just stared at his hand, holding mine. A young man's hand, smooth and capable. A hand that would build beautiful things. "Mom, you shouldn't have," he whispered. He sounded grateful, but also burdened, as if the weight of the silver cross had been transferred from my coat to his shoulders. "For you," I'd said, finally looking up and meeting his gaze, my own eyes fierce and clear. "For you, I can do anything. There is no sacrifice too great." I believed it then, with every fiber of my being. It was my creed. Back in the present, the memory did little to soothe me. It felt different now. Less like a heroic tale and more like a transaction. A debt I had forced upon him. The day before, the party dawned gray and blustery. The sea was churning, smashing against the shore with a fury that matched the growing storm inside me. There had been no return call from Leo. My anxiety was a raw nerve, and I found myself snapping at Maria over the smallest things. "No, the napkins go to the left of the forks, not on top of the plate," I said, my voice sharp as I rearranged a place setting. "It doesn't really matter, Mom. It matters to me. It's how he likes it." Maria fell silent. She spent the rest of the afternoon quietly helping her face a mask of careful patience. Later, I saw her on the phone in the hallway, her voice low. I watched her from the kitchen as she scribbled something on a notepad. When she hung up, she stood still for a long moment, her back to me. She looked at the extravagant bouquet on the table, and I saw her shoulders slump. She came into the kitchen, avoiding my eyes. "Who was that on the phone?" I asked, my tone suspicious. "Just the caterer." Confirming the final numbers, she lied. It was a smooth lie, but I knew my daughter. I knew the stillness in her posture was the stillness of someone bracing for an impact. She knew something. What I didn't know was that she'd found the wrapping paper for the flowers in the recycling bin. She'd seen the name of the florist and on a whim had called to pass on my thanks, a well-meaning gesture. The woman at the shop had been confused. "Oh, it wasn't from a Leo deer," she'd said. "The order was placed by a group. Let me see. A retirement gift from the Gloucester Fish Packers Union for Evelyn Reed." "Isn't that lovely of them?" Maria had held on to that piece of information all afternoon, a small, hot coal in the palm of her hand. She looked at my hopeful, anxious face, and she couldn't bring herself to douse the flame. Not yet. She decided to let me have this one last day of believing. The final blow came that evening. The house was quiet again. Maria and David had gone home. The wind howled outside. I was sitting in my armchair pretending to read a book, but my eyes kept flicking to the silent telephone. I had finally admitted to myself that he wasn't going to call. A cold dread was beginning to set in. Then a small electronic ping came from the old desktop computer in the corner. I rarely used it, but Maria had insisted I have it to stay connected. I walked over to it slowly. An email. My heart leaped. It was from him. He was writing to explain the delay. I clicked it open. The sender wasn't Leo. My eyes scanned the text, and the air left my lungs in a single, silent gasp. Subject: Regarding this weekend, dear Mrs. Reed. Mr. Reed sends his sincere apologies. Due to an unavoidable professional commitment that has arisen, he will be unable to travel for the planned event. He extends his warmest wishes for your birthday. Sincerely, Chloe Jensen, Executive Assistant to Leo Reed. That was it. No, hi Mom. No, I'm so sorry. No, I love you. Just a cold, sterile message from a stranger named Chloe Jensen. It was a press release for a canceled appearance, an announcement of a severed tie. I stared at the screen, the white light illuminating my face in the dim room. The words swam before my eyes. Unavoidable professional commitment. Planned event. He couldn't even call it my birthday. I placed a hand on the desk to steady myself. The fortress I had built my entire life, the one made of sacrifice and unwavering love, had just been leveled by a handful of polite, meaningless words. The silence I had been dreading was finally here, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined. I woke up the next morning, the morning of my 80th birthday, to the sound of the wind rattling my window frames. For a moment, a blissful foggy moment, I forgot. And then the memory of the email crashed down on me, a physical weight on my chest. Unavoidable professional commitment. The words were a sterile gray monument to my heartbreak. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and a choice presented itself. I could call Maria, tell her it was all off. I could pull the covers over my head and let my 80th year begin in the darkness I felt was my due. Or I could get up. I could put on the blue dress Maria had helped me pick out. I could face the day. Something cold and hard settled in my stomach. Something that felt a lot like defiance. He wasn't going to take this from me. His absence would not be the center of the day. My presence would be. I had built this life, this family, this home with my own 2 hands. I would not let a ghost at the feast tear it all down. I got up. I showered. I did my hair, pulling the silver strands back into a bun so tight it pulled at my temples. I put on the blue dress. I looked at the stranger in the mirror, her face a pale mask, her eyes shadowed with a pain I refused to acknowledge. Then I went downstairs. Maria was already there, a key I'd given her years ago, letting her in. She was standing in the living room, wringing her hands, her face etched with worry. She saw me on the stairs and rushed forward. "Mom, I am so sorry. I tried to call you last night after I saw the email. You didn't answer. I didn't know what to do." She had seen it. Of course she had. She had access to my account in case of emergencies. It seemed this qualified. "There's nothing to be sorry for," I said, my voice crisp and even. "Leo is a busy man. His work is very demanding. These things happen." Maria stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "Mom, you don't have to pretend. It's okay to be upset. I'm not upset." I lied, walking past her into the dining room. I am disappointed, of course. But the party will go on. We have 50 guests arriving in a few hours. My gaze fell on the table already partially set from the day before. And in the center of it all, the glorious, vibrant bouquet of lies. The flowers from the Fish Packers Union. A retirement gift. A cruel joke from the universe. I walked over, plucked the empty card from its holder, and dropped it into my apron pocket. Maria followed me, her footsteps hesitant. "Mom, what are you doing getting ready?" I said, starting to lay out the silverware with sharp, precise movements. Fork, knife, spoon. My hands were steady. My heart felt like shattered glass. We should probably take away Leo's place setting," she said softly, reaching for the plate at the far end of the table. My hand shot out and clamped down on her wrist. Not hard, but with a pressure that stopped her cold. She looked from my hand to my face, her eyes wide. "Leave it," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "But Mom, he's not coming. It will just make you sad." I let go of her wrist and looked at the empty chair. "You don't know that I said the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. There could be a change of plans. A surprise. We'll leave it. It's my party." The look on her face was a mixture of pity and frustration. She knew I was clinging to a fantasy. But she also knew my stubbornness. She gave a small, defeated nod. "Okay, Mom. Whatever you want." For the rest of the morning, we worked in a strained silence punctuated by my curt instructions. We were 2 soldiers preparing a battlefield, not a mother and daughter preparing for a celebration. When the first guests arrived, I smoothed my dress, pasted a smile on my face, and opened the door. The performance had begun. "Evelyn, happy birthday. You don't look a day over 60. Thank you for coming. It's so good to see you." The platitudes flowed a river of meaningless kindness. I accepted hugs, I admired gifts, I laughed at jokes, but a part of me was detached, floating near the ceiling, watching myself go through the motions. My eyes of their own accord kept returning to the end of the table. The empty chair stood like a silent accusation, a black hole that pulled all the light and warmth from the room into itself. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, with the endless list of ailments, cornered me by the fireplace. 80 years, Evelyn. What a milestone. And your Leo, he must be so proud of his mother. I hear his company is building skyscrapers now. My Timmy is still selling insurance. He does very well, I said, the smile on my face feeling like a cracking mask of plaster. He wanted to be here, but he was kept away by work. Oh, of course, a very important man, she said, nodding sagely. It's the price of success, isn't it? They fly so high they can't always come back down to the nest. Her words, meant to be comforting, were a knife twisting in my gut. Can't always come back down to the nest. Was that what I was, a nest he had outgrown? The compliment felt like a trigger, and my mind, without permission, replayed a memory I hadn't thought of in years. Leo was 15. He'd won first prize in a statewide student art competition. It was a big deal. The ceremony was held in the high school auditorium. Frank and I were in the front row. When they called Leo's name, I leaped to my feet, applauding so loudly that the people around me turned to look. I cupped my hands around my mouth. "That's my son. That's my boy," I shouted, my voice ringing with a pride so fierce it felt like it would burst from my chest. Leo walked to the stage, a lanky teenager drowning in a borrowed suit jacket. He took the plaque, and the check his face flushed a deep, painful red. He mumbled his thanks into the microphone and practically ran off the stage. Later, during the reception, I was getting us some punch when I passed a small alcove. I heard Leo's voice. He was talking to his best friend, Mark. "Man, that was awesome. Your painting was incredible," Mark was saying. "Thanks," Leo mumbled. I wish my mom wouldn't make such a big deal out of everything. It's so embarrassing." I froze the plastic punch cup, crushing slightly in my hand. The words hit me with the force of a slap. Embarrassing. My pride, my pure, unadulterated joy in his achievement, was a source of shame for him. I saw myself through his eyes, then a loud, unsophisticated woman from the fish plant making a scene. I felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck. I slipped away before they could see me, my heart aching. At home that night, I'd dismissed it. He was a teenager. Teenagers are embarrassed by their parents. It's a law of nature. It meant nothing. I had to believe it meant nothing. I packed the memory away in a dark box in my mind and locked it tight. But now, standing in my living room 40 years later, the box had sprung open. Mrs. Gable was still talking about her bunions, but I wasn't listening. I was back in that auditorium, feeling the sting of his words. I wish she wouldn't make such a big deal. Had my love always been too much? Too loud? Too heavy? Had my sacrifices, which I saw as the foundation of his success, felt to him like a debt he could never repay? The thought was terrifying. It threatened to undo the entire narrative of my life. I excused myself from Mrs. Gable and retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment of quiet. I leaned against the counter, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The sound of the party washed in from the other room, a wave of noise that felt a million miles away. Maria came in, her face full of concern. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I'm fine," I said, straightening up, rebuilding the wall around me, brick by brick. "Just needed a glass of water." I turned on the tap and let the cold water run over my trembling hands. I looked out the kitchen window at my small, tidy garden. Frank and I had planted it together the year we bought the house. So much of my life was in these walls and this patch of earth. And all of it, every single decision, had been for my children. For him. I thought of the empty chair in the other room. It wasn't just a symbol of his absence today. It was a symbol of that distance I first felt in the auditorium, a distance I had ignored for 40 years. It was the space created by a love that was given, but perhaps not received in the way it was intended. The party swirled on a celebration of a life I was no longer sure I understood. The mask was back in place, but I could feel the cracks spreading underneath. The hours bled into one another, a watercolor of smiling faces and meaningless chatter. I cut the cake, my hand steady, as I sliced through the buttercream frosting. I opened gifts, murmuring my thanks for the scented soaps and knitted shawls. I posed for photographs with my grandchildren, a tight, bright smile fixed on my face. Through it all, the empty chair held its vigil at the far end of the table. Some of the guests threw it curious glances, but no one dared to ask. They could feel the invisible wall around it, the sheer force of my will that kept it in its place. Finally, the last of the guests began to depart, leaving with promises to call and final cheerful wishes for my health. The noise receded, draining out of the house like a slow tide, until only the three of us were left, me, Maria, and David. The silence that descended was thick and heavy-weighted with all the things that had not been said. The living room was a landscape of debris, used napkins, empty plates, and half-full glasses. David, bless his quiet heart, began to methodically gather the dishes, creating a small, useful noise in the vast, uncomfortable quiet. I sat in my armchair, the matriarch's throne, and I felt the energy drain out of me. The mask I had worn all day crumbled, and the raw exhaustion underneath was overwhelming. I stared at nothing, my hands lying limp in my lap. Maria came and sat on the ottoman in front of me. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat there, watching me. David finished clearing the main room and retreated to the kitchen, giving us our space. The soft clatter of him rinsing plates was a distant, comforting sound. Mom, Maria finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. I didn't have the strength to rebuild the wall. This pretense, she continued, gesturing vaguely at the room, at the ghost of the party. "It's not helping you. It's not helping anyone." "There is no pretense," I said, my voice a low rasp. "My son was unable to attend. It's a shame, but life goes on." "No," she said, and there was a new strength in her voice, a strength I hadn't heard before. It was the strength of someone who has carried a burden for too long. "It's more than a shame, and you know it. This has been coming for a long time. You just refuse to see it." A spark of my old fire returned. "And what would you know about it?" I snapped. "What do you know about my relationship with my brother?" "I know what I see," she said, her voice rising to match mine. "I see a mother who has turned one child into a god and the other into a servant. I see a brother who is choking on gratitude. And I see myself standing here, trying to hold it all together, while you refuse to look at the truth." Her words stung, sharp and true. "You're jealous!" I spat the old ugly accusation, leaping to my lips before I could stop it. "You've always been jealous of him. Of his talent, of his success, of the life he made for himself." Maria actually laughed, a short, bitter, heartbroken sound. "Jealous mom." "Are you serious? I am the one who lives 10 minutes away. I am the one who drives you to your doctor's appointments. I am the one who calls every single day just to make sure you've eaten. I am the one who organized this entire party, knowing he wouldn't show up, but doing it anyway because I knew you needed to believe he would. When was the last time you asked me about my life, about my job, about my dreams?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "Or does it only matter what you sacrificed for Leo?" The truth of her words was a physical blow. I flinched. When was the last time I'd asked about her life? Not just the day-to-day logistics, but her inner world. I couldn't remember. My mind was a library of Leo's achievements, but the chapter on Maria was full of blank pages. "That's not fair," I whispered, but my protest was weak, pathetic. "Isn't it?" She pressed on, leaning forward, her eyes blazing with years of accumulated pain. "You want to know about the flowers? Your beautiful, magnificent flowers." I looked at her confused. "What about them?" "I called the florist, Mom, to thank them on your behalf. They weren't from Leo. They were from the Fishpackers Union, a retirement gift. Your old coworkers remembered you. Your son, your golden boy, sent an email through his secretary. The room seemed to tilt. The flowers. My proof. My promise. A lie. A simple, well-intentioned gift from old friends that I had twisted into a testament to my son's love." The humiliation was so intense, I felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Because I couldn't bear it," she said, her anger dissolving into sorrow. "I couldn't bear to take away that one last piece of hope you were clinging to. I wanted you to have a happy birthday. But this silence from him, it's not about work, Mom. You have to understand that." And then came the words that would change everything. The words she had been holding back, perhaps for months. The final, devastating truth. The last time I really spoke to him a few months ago, I begged him to come. I told him it was your 80th, and you know what he said? She took a deep, shaky breath, as if the words themselves were toxic. He said, "I can't, Maria. I can't go back there." He said that every time he comes home, he feels like he's drowning. Drowning in a sea of debt for sacrifices he never asked for. Drowning. The word echoed in the silent room. It hit me not with the force of a wave, but with the terrifying, slow-motion certainty of a deep-sea pressure change. The pressure I had been putting on him my whole life. The pressure to succeed. The pressure to be grateful. The pressure to be the living embodiment of my life's worth. It wasn't a last-minute project. It wasn't a scheduling conflict. It was a choice, a deliberate, painful choice to stay away, to save himself. From me. The energy that had carried me through the day, the anger, the defiance, it all vanished. In its place was a vast, cold emptiness. I looked at my daughter, her face streaked with tears, and for the first time, I think I truly saw her. I saw her hurt her loyalty, her impossible position caught between a mother who wouldn't see and a brother who couldn't breathe. He said that I whispered. She just nodded her eyes, full of a sorrow that mirrored my own, the narrative of my life, the story of the self-sacrificing mother whose love propelled her son to greatness shattered. The frame broke, the glass splintered, and the image tore, revealing something ugly and distorted underneath. I wasn't the wind beneath his wings. I was the anchor around his neck. The knowledge was a crushing weight, and I felt myself begin to sink under it into a silence far deeper than the one Leo had imposed. I had built my identity on a foundation of his gratitude, and the foundation had just turned to dust. Maria's words hung in the air, long after she spoke them, ghostly architecture in the ruins of my party. Drowning. The word became the room. The air grew thick and heavy, hard to breathe. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this scene from a great distance. I saw an old woman, me, shrink into her armchair. I saw a middle-aged daughter, my Maria, her face a canvas of pain and pity, finally having said the unsayable. David reappeared in the doorway of the kitchen, his hands wiped dry on a dish towel, his presence a silent, supportive pillar for his wife. I couldn't speak. What was there to say? Every defense I had ever constructed had been dismantled. Every justification had been exposed as a self-serving myth. I had spent a lifetime polishing the story of my sacrifice, until it gleamed, never once stopping to consider that the other characters in my story might have their own versions. Ma Maria's voice was soft, now tentative. The storm had passed, leaving behind the devastating calm of a wreckage. I shook my head, a small, helpless gesture. I couldn't look at her. To look at her would be to acknowledge the truth of what she'd said, and I wasn't ready. Not yet. I pushed myself up from the armchair, my bones creaking in protest. My body felt ancient, as if the last hour had aged me a decade. I'm tired, I said, my voice a monotone. I'm going to bed. I walked past them, not a queen leaving her court, but a ghost phasing through a world that no longer felt real. I didn't say goodnight. I climbed the stairs one slow step at a time, each footfall a monumental effort. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. My bedroom was my sanctuary, but tonight it offered no comfort. It felt like a stranger's room. I undressed, letting the blue party dress fall to the floor in a heap. I didn't turn on the lamp. I sat on the edge of my bed in the darkness, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. Sleep was an ocean away. My mind, which I had kept so fiercely disciplined for so long, was now in open rebellion. It replayed my life, but the scenes were all wrong. The lighting was different, the angles skewed. Memories I had always held up as examples of my love now seemed tainted, curdled. I remembered Leo in high school, his heart set on a summer trip to Europe with his friends. It was a backpacking trip, cheap and cheerful, but I had forbidden it. It's too dangerous, I'd said. You have your art. You need to focus. You can't be wasting time and money on such foolishness. I had framed it as protection, as maternal concern, but now in the suffocating darkness of my room, I saw it for what it was: control. I hadn't wanted him to have an experience that was purely his own, one that I had no part in, one that wasn't aimed at the grand project of his future success. I remembered the look on his face, the brief, sharp flash of resentment before it was replaced by the familiar mask of filial obedience. Then another memory surfaced more painful than the last. Leo was in his late 20s, and he brought a woman home for Christmas. Her name was Sarah. She was a painter, free-spirited kind with a laugh that filled the whole house. She looked at Leo as if he were the sun and moon. But I hadn't approved. She wasn't substantial enough. She had no career path, no ambition that I could recognize. She would distract him, I told myself. She would derail the future I had paid for with my mother's brooch. I never said a cruel word to her face. I was more subtle than that. I was the master of the passive-aggressive chill, the well-placed, backhanded compliment. It must be so liberating, Sarah, to pursue your art without worrying about commercial success. Leo, of course, has so many responsibilities. I would talk endlessly about his work, his potential, the importance of his focus, all, while Sarah sat there smiling politely, her presence slowly being erased. They broke up a few months later. Leo never told me why, but I knew. I had poisoned the well. I had told myself I was protecting him. Now I knew I had just been protecting my investment. A wave of nausea washed over me. Who was this woman in my memories? This cold, calculating manipulator disguised as a loving mother. It was me. It had always been me. The night wore on a long, dark tunnel with no end in sight. I couldn't stay in the room any longer. I stood up and walked as if in a trance down the hallway to the room at the end. Leo's room. I hadn't changed a thing since he'd left for college. The twin bed was still covered with the plaid comforter I'd bought him. The desk was still there, the shelves above it lined with books and old trophies. It was a museum of a childhood I had curated. I switched on the small desk lamp, and the room was bathed in a soft yellow light. My eyes fell on a large, scuffed cardboard box tucked away under the bed, a box I hadn't looked in for 30 years. It was labeled, Leo's Old Drawings. On a sudden impulse, I pulled it out. It was heavy. I sat on the floor, the cold of the wood seeping through my nightgown, and I lifted the lid. I had expected to find the award-winning paintings from high school, the carefully rendered architectural drawings he'd done for college applications. But that's not what was in here. This box was full of secrets. It was full of the art he had hidden from me. I lifted out sketchbook after sketchbook, the pages filled with charcoal and pencil drawings. There were portraits of people I didn't know their faces, raw with emotion. There were landscapes of places he'd never been, wild and free and windswept. There was a raw energy in these drawings, a passion that was missing from the precise technical work he'd shown me. This was the artist he had wanted to be. The one I had told him wasn't good enough, wasn't stable enough. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. I was a trespasser rifling through the soul of my own son. And then I found it, at the bottom of the last sketchbook. It was a drawing of a woman. Her back was to the viewer, but I recognized the set of her shoulders, the tight bun of her hair. It was me, but it was a version of me I had never seen. I was drawn as a colossal figure, a giantess of shadow looming over the entire page. My form was so vast, so dark, that it cast a deep, oppressive blackness over everything. And down in the bottom right corner, almost lost in the darkness, was a tiny figure. A boy sitting at a desk, his head in his hands, a single sliver of light from a window falling on him. It was Leo. I stared at the image, my heart pounding in my ears. The artistry was stunning, the emotion devastating. This was how he saw me, not as a supportive pillar, but as an eclipse, a life-blocking shadow. My hand went to my mouth to stifle a sob. Beneath the drawing, scrawled in his familiar handwriting, were 2 words. Just 2. It's enough. That was it. The final, undeniable truth. It was a plea, a declaration, and a verdict all in one. My love, my care, my sacrifice, it had all been too much. It hadn't been a gift. It had been a burden. It hadn't been a foundation. It had been a cage. He wasn't drowning in gratitude. He was suffocating under the weight of my expectations. The sketchbook slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor. The sound was barely audible, but in the silence of the house it sounded like a gavel falling. Guilty. A profound, soul-shattering sob tore its way out of my chest. A sound of pure agony. I curled into a ball on the cold wooden floor of my son's childhood bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of the life I had unknowingly stifled, and I wept. I wept for the boy who had to hide his true self. I wept for the man who felt he had to run away to breathe. And I wept for the mother who had been so blind for so long that she had mistaken a prison for a home. The party was over. The performance was done. There was nothing left now but the wreckage. I don't know how long I lay on the floor. Time had lost its shape, stretching and collapsing in the rhythm of my ragged breaths. The first pale gray light of dawn began to filter through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny forgotten memory. I was cold, my limbs stiff and aching, but the physical discomfort was a distant echo of the gaping wound inside me. I sat up slowly, my body protesting. The sketchbooks were scattered around me on the floor, an archipelago of my son's hidden heart. I looked again at the drawing of me as a shadow, the two small words underneath it. It's enough. The anger was gone. The denial was gone. All the brittle defenses I had lived behind for so long had been washed away by the night's deluge of grief. All that remained was a hollow, aching clarity. I heard the front door open and close softly downstairs. Maria. She had come back. I pictured her walking into the disastrous aftermath of the party, her heart likely sinking at the thought of another confrontation. I couldn't face her. Not yet, but I couldn't hide either. With an effort that felt Herculean, I gathered the sketchbooks, stacked them neatly, and placed them on Leo's desk. I stood up, smoothed down my wrinkled nightgown, and walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind me. I found her in the living room. She had already started bagging up the leftover paper plates and napkins. She was moving with a quiet, somber efficiency, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, her body tensing, preparing for another battle. But when she saw my face, her expression changed. The defensiveness in her eyes softened into confusion, then concern. I must have looked like a ghost. I probably was. I didn't say anything. I just walked over to the sofa and sat down. The silence stretched between us, but it was different from the day before. It wasn't a silence thick with unspoken resentments. It was an empty space waiting to be filled with something new. Finally, I cleared my throat. My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. I was wrong, Maria. She stopped what she was doing, a plastic bag of trash held limply in her hand. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. In all her 52 years, I had never once said those words to her. I had never admitted fault, never conceded a point, never acknowledged a mistake. I was wrong. I repeated, my voice a little stronger this time. The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign, and yet somehow liberating. About Leo. About everything. I gestured toward the stairs. His room. On the desk. You should go and see. She hesitated for a moment, then set the bag down and walked slowly out of the room and up the stairs. I listened to her footsteps, the soft creak of the floorboards in the hallway, then the silence as she entered his room. I sat there, my hands knotted in my lap, and I waited. I was giving her the key, the one piece of evidence that proved her right, that proved me a fool. It was the only offering I had left. The minutes stretched on. I could hear the faint sound of pages turning. I imagined her seeing the drawings for the first time, the raw passion in them so different from the polished architect she knew. I imagined her finding the final devastating portrait. I imagined her seeing me through his eyes. When she came back downstairs, her own eyes were wet. She wasn't crying, but the tears were there, shimmering. She held one of the sketchbooks in her hand, her fingers tracing the cover as if it were a sacred object. She came and sat next to me on the sofa. I never knew, she said, her voice choked with emotion. He never showed me these. I knew he was unhappy, but I didn't know the depth of it. Neither did I said. Or maybe I did and I chose not to see it. It's the same thing in the end. We sat in silence for a while longer, the shared discovery of fragile bridge between us. It was a bridge built of pain, but it was a bridge nonetheless. He hated the idea of architecture, I said, the confession scraping my throat. He told me once he wanted to be a painter, just a painter. I told him it wasn't a real career. I told him he had to be practical. I told him I was only thinking of his future. I gave a short, bitter laugh. His future, or mine. The one I wanted to be able to brag about to Mrs. Gable down the street. Maria reached out and placed her hand over mine. Her hand was warm and strong. I didn't pull away. You loved him, Mom, she said softly. You did it all because you loved him. Is that what it was? I asked, looking at our joined hands. Or was it pride I wanted him to be my masterpiece? My proof to the world that my life, my struggle, had been worth it. I didn't want a son. I wanted a monument. And when a person is treated like a monument for long enough, they turn to stone. For the first time, I turned to look at her fully to really see the woman she had become while I was so focused on her brother. I saw the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, but also the deep well of compassion within them. You were right, I said. Yesterday, everything you said was right. I haven't been a good mother to you, Maria. I've taken you for granted. I've seen your loyalty as an obligation, not a gift. Can you ever forgive me? A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She squeezed my hand. There's nothing to forgive, she whispered, though we both knew it wasn't true. But it was an act of grace, a beginning. All those years I murmured more to myself than to her. All those double shifts at the plant, all the things I did without. I thought I was giving him wings, but I was just building the walls of his cage higher. I finally understood. The empty chair wasn't a punishment from him to me. It was an act of survival. It wasn't about a lack of love. It was about a desperate need for air. He hadn't abandoned me. He had liberated himself. The realization didn't lessen the pain, but it changed its character. It was no longer the sharp sting of betrayal, but the dull, heavy ache of regret. It was a pain I knew I deserved, a pain I had to learn to live with. In that quiet living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my own making, the long, difficult work of acceptance had begun. The days that followed were quiet. Maria came over every morning. We didn't talk much about Leo. We didn't need to. The subject hung in the air between us, understood. Instead, we did other things. We cleaned up the last of the party debris together. We sat in the kitchen and drank tea, and for the first time, I asked her about her work. I listened, really listened, as she told me about a student in her class who was struggling with reading and the small breakthrough she'd had with him that week. Her face lit up as she spoke, and I saw a passion in her that I had been blind to for decades. It was a quieter passion than the one in Leo's sketchbooks, but it was just as profound. One afternoon, I found her in the garden, patiently weeding the overgrown flower beds. I watched her from the kitchen window for a long time, her back strong and steady as she worked. I had always seen Maria's life as small, contained, but now I saw the truth. Her life wasn't small. It was deep. She had built it on a foundation of kindness and responsibility, nurturing the people in the small patch of earth around her. She hadn't flown away, but she had grown deep roots. I had been so busy looking at the sky that I had failed to appreciate the beauty of the ground beneath my feet. A week after the party, I knew what I had to do. The thought had been taking shape in my mind, a slow and painful crystallization of my new understanding. I sat down at the old desk in the corner of the living room, the one where I had read the devastating email from Leo's assistant. I took out a piece of my best stationery, the cream-colored paper I saved for important occasions. I picked up a pen, my hand surprisingly steady. I started to write. I didn't know what I was going to say, but the words began to come. I didn't write about the party. I didn't write about the empty chair or the cold email. I didn't ask for an explanation or an apology. My dearest Leo, I began. I have been spending some time in your old room. I found your sketchbooks, the ones you kept hidden under the bed. They are beautiful, truly beautiful. They are full of a life and a passion that I was too blind to see when you were here. I am writing to you today not to ask you to come home, but to tell you that I understand why you left. I spent your whole life telling you what you should be, what you should want. I never stopped to listen to what your own heart was telling you. I thought my love was a gift, Leo. I see now that it was a weight. I am so sorry for the heaviness I placed upon your shoulders. I sold your grandmother's brooch to help you start your company. I told myself it was a noble sacrifice. I see now that it was a transaction. It was a chain I wrapped around you to bind you to my dreams. I am so terribly sorry for that. I don't want you to feel like you are drowning anymore. I want you to feel like you can fly. Whatever that means for you. Forget the architecture if it does not bring you joy. Forget the big successful life I always wanted for you. Just live your life. A life that is truly your own. That is all I want now. I am setting you free, my son. Or perhaps I am finally acknowledging the freedom that you had to take for yourself. I don't expect a reply. I don't expect you to call. I just needed you to know that I see you now. Not the monument I tried to build, but the man you are. I love you. Truly, Mom. I folded the letter and put it in an envelope. I wrote his address in California on the front. When Maria came over that afternoon, I handed it to her. "Will you mail this for me?" I asked. She took it, her eyes reading my face. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. She simply nodded. Of course, Mom. Watching her walk away with that letter in her hand was one of the hardest things I have ever done. It was an act of complete surrender. I was letting go of all control, all expectation. I was sending my heart out into the world with no guarantee it would be received. The weeks passed. Autumn deepened the leaves on the maple tree outside my window, turning from green to a fiery red, then falling one by one. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was no longer the empty waiting silence of before. It was a peaceful silence. Maria and I settled into a new rhythm. We had dinner together twice a week. I started helping her in her garden. I found a simple pleasure in the feel of the cool earth, in the satisfaction of pulling a stubborn weed. I was finding small joys in my own small patch of earth. I didn't expect to hear from Leo. The letter was a release, not a summons. I had made my peace with the silence. And then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, a package arrived. It was a small, flat cardboard box with Leo's familiar handwriting on the return address label. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a brand new sketchbook, its cover a deep calming blue. On top of it lay a single sheet of folded paper. A letter. I unfolded it with a sense of dread and hope, so intertwined. I couldn't separate them. The note was short. Just 3 sentences? "Mom, I got your letter. Thank you. I love you too." That was all. No promises to visit, no explanations for the past. But it was more than I had ever hoped for. It was an answer. It was a bridge. Beneath the note was a new drawing done in charcoal. It was a picture of 2 figures. One was an old woman with silver hair, her shoulders relaxed, not stooped. The other was a man standing beside her. They weren't looking at each other. They were standing side by side, looking out at a rising sun. There were no looming shadows. There was no giantess and no frightened boy, just 2 people sharing a view. I carried the drawing to the living room and sat in my armchair. I held it in my hands, tracing the lines of the figures with my finger. A tear, just one, escaped and rolled down my cheek, falling onto the paper. It wasn't a tear of grief or regret. It was a tear of acceptance, of a quiet, painful, beautiful peace. The chair at my table might remain empty for a long time to come. Maybe forever. But the space between me and my son, once a chasm of unspoken resentments and crushing expectations, was now finally filled with something else. It was filled with light. I had lost the son I thought I owned, the masterpiece I had tried to create. But in his place, I had found the real man. And in the process, in the quiet of my own life, I was finally beginning to find myself.